So I was talking about justice, and it got me to thinking. I'm going to do a little bit of different color here for you. Um, so I wanted to kind of get this idea out and see how, if there's any reaction to it whatsoever. But when you, I've kind of been going over this idea of emergent strategies, but strategies are emergent in general. So rules set up the system, but strategies are actually outside the system of rules. And this is why justice is such a problem, because how we use the rules to accomplish our goals is the strategy, right? It's not about the rules. It's about how we use the rules to achieve our ends. So we have this idea of fairness, which is good, but we kind of assume that there's no inherent problem with coming up with fair rules without looking at the strategies that the rules will encourage. Now, we do recognize this when we the intent of the law instead of the spirit of the law, and then the letter of the law. What does the law actually say? What can you actually prove with the way a law is written? So the spirit is basically the goal of the law, and the letter is what it actually does. So now you can develop a strategy to smuggle in a new goal that wasn't observable with the general rule. So people often are afraid to say stuff like the ends justify the means, and that's why I titled it "The Means Are Rewarded by the Ends." You can't help that fact. So when you say something is incentivized, what you're saying is you're creating a goal, and you're not going to worry about how they get to the goal. You're not too much. You know, you may have cheating rules and stuff like that. I mean, you're not... if you look at Lance Armstrong and his debacle with doping, everyone turned a blind eye to what was going on. They didn't want to know how they were achieving this. They sold the story that they weren't cheating, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge, they were. And that was the real sad part, was it was such a corruption in the system, because you had established this the reward system was so great that, you know, it incentivized cheating to such an extent that almost everyone was doing it by the end. Well, at least the people that were relevant for the most part. Now, I don't know how people feel about being called cheaters, and that's the crime for all the people that weren't, and they did very, very well, given the fact that they weren't doing any kind of cheating. You know, that really pisses on them, right? So, so you can incentivize a system. You can narrowly incentivize a system, and that's problematic. So you have to make sure that you have secondary and tertiary goals that are highly incentivized to do certain things. Now, interesting, the game of snooker is interesting characteristics to that game. And I didn't know much about snooker, and then I started realizing they had some rewards built into the game. And what is a perfect clearance is where you get the maximum amount of points possible shooting in the balls. Now, you'll have to look at the rules of snooker to understand exactly what I'm talking about. But the point here is that for the organizers of the tournaments, they want to incentivize a specific behavior. And so they had to come up with a secondary award, not just winning the frame, but they wanted people to continue to get the highest points possible. So they had to create a secondary award for highest frame. It's more work, if it forces a higher quality game. But so there were secondary goals. Creating a reward system for the behaviors you want is the way you get it. Now, Sullivan, one of the major players, mocked the scoring system one time because he didn't think the incentive was high enough. So he got 1 point less than the maximum. And people sharply criticized him for it. He says, I don't think I'm being paid enough for the maximum. You're only paying me a little bit more than getting the highest in this tournament. Anyways, long story short is he's a rubber rouser, but it is interesting. So he was incentivized to mock the system of giving him a lower payout than he thought was worth. So it was his way to challenge the organizers of that tournament to consider raising their rate. If you want me to play my best, if you want the maximum score, you're going to have to pay me more. It's an interesting argument, and it's certainly what you get what you incentivize. And this is the ends, the means are rewarded by the ends, right? If there are paths for someone to take, they're going to take those. Path of least resistance. So it's a beautiful theory to think that rules, we got to obey the rules. And as a matter of fairness, you do have to obey the rules. And that would be, and this is one of the things that's difficult, because lying, there's a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to lie. In general, it's a bad strategy. So you don't want to incentivize lying. But you do incentivize it when you don't adequately reward truthfulness. If telling the truth is punished and lying is rewarded, then you'll get lying. So it's not the rule. We know there's a value in not lying. But do you want to incentivize lying and disincentivize telling the truth? So these are the ways that, if you turn it around and look at it from a functional perspective, what happens with our goals. So really, the ends justify the means really kind of explains evolution. So from a philosophical standpoint, it's a great theory, or it's an argument to say that the ends shouldn't justify the means. Well, they're going to in the end, right? History is told by the survivors, to a certain extent. So if you want to survive, if you want that society to be there, you have to look at the end product of that. So you say that's a brilliant rule, but how are people going to game that rule to encourage their survival? Or, can you tell someone, well, you don't have a right to survive? Or are you going to tell someone that they can't do that because I physically can't do that, because you don't want me to do that, because I'm gaming a system? So when you look at the behaviors of people, you got to say, what's in it for them? What would their goals be in this situation? So as much as you might want to throw someone's ideas away so that their opinions don't matter, if you don't recognize that they are going to behave in a way that is beneficial to them, then you're discounting human behavior, or you're trying to explain human behaviors in terms that don't adequately address the motives of everyone. So if you've ever come up with the idea that the ends do not justify the means, challenge it, if only to have that conversation and understand how many systems, that feedback system that we have built in so many different places. The market system is a feedback system. Money is the reward. The product is the goal. Product is the goal. Now, in economics, one of the things that we need to realize is that you as an individual are creating value for a product. A product does not have value until you want it. Once you want it, then it has value. Some people, if we just look at the products and we don't look at how you as an individual play into the economic system, then we're missing the human factor. And that's a lot of what Gad Saad does when he looks at evolutionary behavior and marketing. But so we do need to remember how the ends, how the goals are affecting how we get to the goals. We can say these are the rules, but if someone can cheat and there's no consequences for cheating, they're going to cheat. So both, you can do several things. You can align your goals such that it disincentivizes cheating because the cost is so high, and they'll get caught or whatever. But so you definitely want to have disincentives for cheating, but you want to make sure your reward structure is set up in such a way that you incentivize the positive behavior you want. Now, the thing to realize is we are more prone to react to negativity. So this is the flight response or the fight response. We don't know which. The advantage to a positive reinforcer is that we know more about its directionality. We know that their behavior will be in a specific direction to achieve a specific goal, if we make that goal attainable. So in any system you look at, whether biological or sociological, any system will have incentives built in to incentivize a behavior, a walkway. Paths create an incentive to use them. Now, if paths are in a bad location, there'll be an incentive not to use them, to cross over the yard or whatever. There's interesting architectural theory on where to put paths. Can you do it in an organic way? Can you make it desirable? Make it a hill such that it's not desirable to walk over it, right? So paths, creating low-lying paths that are more convenient than the higher. There's a number of ways of solving that problem architecturally. And recognizing that strategies are independent of rules. So we might not know the optimal strategy until there's been time to explore the strategy space. And that's the beautiful thing for me when looking at the game of Go and the tournaments of AlphaGo, is a sort of a peer strategy system that's just solely interested in optimizing strategy. And the things that emerge from that pure strategy optimization of AlphaGo is that the human factor in strategies is huge, and the emotional attachment to certain behaviors is evident in the way AlphaGo is not playing. And as it's described to me, because I'm not a Go player, but as I've been watching and it's been analyzed, one thing that was evident to me and was reinforced by the commentators is that a AlphaGo play is very central, meaning it's playing the entire board. Human players tend to have a bias towards one side or the other. It's very hard to play the center of the board. And so in many ways, that's a very new way of looking at Go, and it's forced the best Go players to reanalyze the board and to look into AlphaGo space. Now, the thing that's been pointed out is because AlphaGo doesn't have those human biases, the games may look simpler, and in fact, they are simpler. Because AlphaGo is only looking for the path that is most likely to result in a win. It doesn't need to destroy his opponent. And when it sees a fight and there's no advantage to it fighting, it will avoid the fight and what they call play away. Now, that's a pure analyst of strategy, advanced level strategy. Now, we can look at Tic-Tac-Toe, we can look at tit for tat, but this is the first example of a complex, emergent strategy system. You know, we don't know the optimal strategy in Go. You know, maybe there is an optimal strategy. Maybe AlphaGo actually reached that optimum strategy, but it's unlikely. But here's a system that is always looking at the bottom line, always saying, well, how does that move advantage me? Or how does it advantage the bottom line, the end product? How do I get where I want to go? Where is that stone most effective? And so it reinforces the idea in me that we are biased, and our biases really, really hurt us in terms of a belief in, like, the ends don't justify the means. And this is not saying that we have good rules and there's good reasons for those rules. It's not just that it's a rule and we shouldn't break the rule. It's that the rules are actually a strategy. The golden rule is a strategy. It's not really a rule. It's like, look, if you want me to respect you, you need to respect me. And it's that reciprocity, that feedback process that's important. And that is important to recognize. It's theory of mind. It's like, I respect you, so my behavior will illustrate the fact that I respect you, so that you will know, you will then be given permission to respect me. So when we think of ethics, oftentimes people go into a moral framework. And that's where I think we run into problems. And I was somewhat delighted by Steven Pinker's observation that probably what we need less of is morality. And I was kind of like, wow, that's kind of weird coming from him, because I know the circles that he communicates in. But the point is that we set these moral questions as being, this is morally right, and we don't think about the consequences. From your moral theory perspective, that may in fact be correct, but from a consequence perspective, that's a really bad idea. So I don't think sometimes I think people lack a sense of what are the consequences of the behavior. But as soon as I say consequences, I'm actually talking about the ends. What is the end result of that behavior? Even if most of the time it's a good idea, there will be examples when it doesn't work. So be aware of what the incentives are for a behavior and say, is that incentive something I want to encourage, or is it something I want to discourage? Do I want to reshape that incentivization program? And that's, what is the behavior you're trying to get at? And that's what's so important in my mind, to be thinking about what are the natural incentives in an environment. And you will generally get that behavior. Now, there's an esoteric view of it, but we can apply it to a lot of different domains. And I can look at, now let's make it contextual. Let's put it into the Sargon, Anita Sarkeesian situation. Now, what anyone says is irrelevant, okay? If you know there can be a reaction, then you're in some ways culpable for that reaction. And it's not even culpable. It's not, at this point, it's not responsibility. It's like, how are you going to maximize the benefit you're seeking? So, like Monday Matt was saying, well, I just wanted to be friends, right? Well, that's not exactly what he said, but I think he'll forgive me my creative license here. But can you do that? I mean, have you established trust? What is the incentive for Anita to push back on you? Now, I've established before, Anita comes from a fragile perspective. It's easy to break her. So she has a very protective mechanism. She does not want to engage. Censorship is her primary means of survival. She just simply censors. She creates a reality distortion field around her and kicks people out that don't, adhere to that perspective of reality. And that I find is interesting, but if you're not aware of that, then you would be forgiven. But as a critic, as an observer, you have to be aware of how she reacts. Now, I think that the shitlords, quote unquote, aren't necessarily, I think what they did was admirable, and I'm with them, but I just from a devil's advocate perspective, was it the maximum benefit they could have had? I don't know. And I think anyone looking at a situation and realizing what Anita represents, the Holy Grail. Now, see, the thing is, there's a little bit of cockiness now in the shitlord community because of the behavior of Lacey Green. All of a sudden, there's hope that maybe we can actually have a conversation on what would actually happen. Do you really want a conversation? So you better be prepared to have that conversation if that opportunity comes up. So the expectations have changed. The unattainable goal may actually be attainable. Could we actually have a conversation? But here's the thing. How do you incentivize Anita to have that conversation? What's in it for her? Now, I have a few strategies that I would employ, and it would depend on what she really wants to have as a message. She could have a very powerful message. She could have a career. She could go places with what she's already established. She has opportunities. But as an individual, we would have to help her see those opportunities and to be aware of them herself and give her those opportunities without regret. So she may become more famous than Sargon of Akkad if he plays his cards in a specific way. And could he be okay with that? That's an interesting question. And I don't know the answer to it, but it is part of understanding what the goals would be for your opponent. Looking at what kind of incentives do they have to engage, and to give them those incentives to engage. So this is a ramble. I'm trying to incorporate it into the ideology of how I want to talk about issues as they occur. And I will tend to disagree in nuanced ways with people's perspectives, because I've established a couple variants on theories that people have about ethics, about incentives, and about responsibility. In the end, it's about being honest with what you think you know. And unfortunately, you're not going to be able to prove everything you think you know. So this is a theory, and it's a hypothesis more than a theory, but there is some underpinnings of ideas that are reinforced by evolutionary and information theory and artificial intelligence. So seeing these convergent ideas in terms of feedback loops primarily is what encourages me to think that this might be a new approach to working with ethics. I'm actually currently engaged in a compassion course, as everybody calls it. And I have, from the beginning, I knew I had a disagreement with the idea of needs. Needs exist as a subset of goals. So I want X, therefore I need Y. So you always have a goal that informs your needs. And that's neither here nor there in some respects, because you can look at someone's needs without having to know you're going to want to know their goals. To really understand their needs, you have to know what their goals are. Now, some goals are stated, some goals are in conflict with other goals. And understanding why that is because we have different systems within the brain that are trying to do things to balance the equation of survival, which we have multiple goals at any one time. So think in terms of goals, not just in terms of your life goals, but in terms of what goals you might have at any one point in time. And I like the black and white. It makes me feel more comfortable. So if you don't like it, let me know. That'd be funny to know about. But yeah, it works for me, especially when I just have this silly green screen in back. Yeah, this live stream thing, I'm not sure it's such a red hot idea, but it forces me to actually create the content. Because what I wouldn't do, if I get thinking too much about content, I understand how to edit and rearrange, and it takes so much time to do that I would fail in getting the content out there. And that's been a part of my inhibitions. It's not that I don't want to create quality content, it's that I don't know how to do it efficiently and get the quality out there. And I think a lot of people struggle with this. And you know, who you are as a person and how do you approach the subject. Because really what this is about the conversation. And I'll come back to that again and again because I think it's central that you understand what my goals are. So it is about engagement. But you need to say who you are so people have something to engage with. And that's true for you as well as for me. Thanks for watching if you watched. And who knows, I might do it again. I don't think so. Not at least not today.